Okay, so welcome everyone again. This is the second part of the eye openings video. Today we'll talk about a bit more advanced concepts. Hope it's useful. Don't worry, you don't need to have watched the previous video, but the basic principle are explained in the other video. This is if you want to start to study Hive a bit more regularly, properly, in a structured way. And I think everyone should do that at some point. It's very exciting. So let's go. Okay, the first concept I want to talk about is the configuration of the queens. This is something we learn very easily at the beginning of the game. Whenever we place our queen, the other queen can be placed on the same side of the starting axis, on the opposite side, or even on the same starting axis. Same is true for white. So the reciprocal position of the two queens kind of brings the game into a certain certain position and gives certain flavor. For example, a C opening where the two queens are found on the same side might see a bit more rings, and the starting bags become quite important, since once this kill spot is taken, then both could be potentially free at the same time. Then we have a Z opening where two queens are found on opposite sides, and this in some cases might become might lead to a more stretched Hive, but it's not a rule. Of course, it really depends on how the game develops. For instance, compared to the C opening, the likelihood of having draws decreases as well, because there are no shared kill spots. There's also what is called a J opening, where the queen is on the white queen is on the starting axis and the black queen is on the flank. Either way, this was actually considered not very good at the beginning, like 5-6 years ago, and then people start to play it very often. Of course, there are pros and cons. The main con is that it's harder to free the starting bag, but there are pros, like there are ways to create a specific shapes or formations that are not possible with a C or a Z opening. But I'll talk about it later or in another video. So the C, Z, J, then there is what is called F opening, which is basically inverted color J opening. These are the main ones, but then we need to add the buffer opening to them. So either of the each of this C, Z, J, or F, they can be played in a buffer fashion. For example, let's say a C opening. If we add an extra piece here and we move the queen here, we say the black has played a buffer. In this case, a C black buffer. Of course, white can play a buffer as well. So in this case, we have a double buffer, C double buffer, which is not very common, but still possible. This is a black Z buffer, but we can also have a J black buffer, or a white, let's say a white F buffer. So basically for each of this we have an extra fork with white and black buffers. So there's a huge variability, and also buffers were considered not very effective until a few years ago, but probably since quality bet started to play very regularly, and other player recognized the advantages of this opening, the benefits of this opening. I play it very often as well, and it's quite interesting. So the important thing is each of this opening has a slight different flavor and can lead to quite different position. So it's important to understand the difference between each of them. And of course, getting some experience, play them as much as possible. I usually suggest to stick with something and then test it for some time to understand what's the best way to place the other pieces, what kind of patterns can be formed. But I'll talk about this later. So another idea that is very related to queen configuration is the move order. Okay, so there are usually many different ways to reach the same opening position. If we consider the queen configuration that we talked about before, an interesting point is that most of the time it's black who picks the configuration. And this is because black plays second. So let's say white plays the queen immediately as a second move. Now black has the choice between Z, C, or F opening, or even a buffer. And of course, white is not forced to do that. It can delay this decision for one more move. And then if black plays the queen, it will be white choice. So there's this waiting and see game, so that you're able to pick what kind of queen configuration you want. Of course, black can delay again. Now the ball is again in white's court. And then if white plays the queen, then black again has a choice between C or Z, either buffer or standard. But white can delay again. In some cases, people like to play this inline setup. So now black can delay eventually one more move. But not everyone likes to play this kind of way. If they place the queen now, then white cannot delay anymore. You have to, by the rules, to place the queen by your fourth turn. So at this point, well, in this case, is what white wants to decide, C or Z. If black delays again, then white has still sort of a choice. So in this case, white placing the queen here is basically leaving to black the choice of a Z opening or a buffer C opening. If white plays the queen here, then black will have the choice between a C opening or a buffer Z opening. So the move order is actually important. Okay, let's pick another example. We play white and we want to reach this kind of formation, which is a classical flexible setup. That's why I call it. To reach this setup, there are many different ways. Actually, there are 6 different ways. And of course, as we said, some of them will lead to some decision by black, but not others. So let's have a look. So let's say we want to play the queen first. As we said, black will have now the choice of what queen configuration to have. If we play the white mosquito first, then we will not have an ant to move immediately, so we cannot attack the black queen as we would do if we had an ant. So it kind of rules out a certain variation. Or black could even play an ant as a second or third move, and at that point black will be able to play a variation that it would not be able to play otherwise. This one, or counterattack, maybe less likely. While if white wants to attack quickly with an ant, oops, it will need to place an ant as a second move. But if we want to reach the configuration that we talked about before, then the ant needs to be on a flank. So let's say here, which means that black has again the right to decide, the chance to decide which configuration to have. So playing this will mean that we're gonna play a J or a Z opening, or if black plays here, then we'll have either a J or a C opening. That's also why one of the actually most common move order is this one, placing an ant here, because it keeps the flexibility of different configurations. And then if black keeps going in the classical black setup, then we can either place the queen and then mosquito the next move. Although we don't obtain the same setup that I was showing you before. The other setup was this one, which is not exactly the same, so there might be important differences. It's a matter of taste, of course. I don't think one is better than the other one, but it's important to consider that different move orders will lead to different setups or different choices by your opponent. So if you want to play specific variations, then you probably want to use a specific move order, or pay attention to the move order of your opponent. As a practical example, I can talk about my games with Stepanzo in the last World Cup semi-final. So I know that he was used to play an AntiSpawn setup, this kind of setup with black, and I wanted to play this variation with white. So I want to attack quickly with a mosquito here. Of course, this is possible only if this space here in line is free. And Stepanzo knows that as well. So if black wants to avoid that specific move order, they can still go into an anti-spawn setup, but first playing a mosquito here. First white mosquito and then a black mosquito. But what I mean is, now this option is no more available. So white has to play something else. That's also a waiting move. And then black can go into the anti-spawn, but he has avoided the variation that I wanted to play. So that's what I mean. You can play certain variations to rule out, to get into specific openings or specific position that you want. Of course, there is a drawback, like mosquito might be not perfectly positioned here, and some people like to have the mosquito here to play in a combo with the pillbug, which is very common. But every move order has pros and cons. There's not the best move order ever, otherwise it would be too easy and I will be boring. Not only the mosquito, actually, if we go back, we can actually, after this, black could play an ant here, and then the anti-spawn setup as we know it. Again, there are pros and cons. In some cases, black could even play move the ant somewhere, and then keep the anti-spawn setup for later. But of course, there is a risk that white will break, that would take the spawn points, and then that is not possible anymore, and then black has to move into a different setup. So it's all a matter of understanding what choices you have and what choices you want to deny to your opponent for the particular setup you like. Another important idea that I already mentioned is shapes or formations. Basically means the way your pieces are placed, what kind of geometric shape they form, and what kind of pieces form these shapes. So for example, these are two typical diamonds. So when these four bugs are put in this way, they usually call diamonds or cluster. And it's a very typical one because it can easily evolve into other shapes. The most common is the pocket or shell. There are different ways to form a pocket from here. Of course, this is probably the most common, with the pill bag defending the queen and the mosquito inside the pocket. But you can also form a pocket in this way if you want to increase your mobility in a fast way. And of course, the combination of different patterns from white and black, they give life to many different openings. And so it's important to understand the pros and cons of each of them. For example, the diamond can be played in this situation as well. So extended not to the flank, but to this position on the left. The pocket can be played in this way as well. These are all typical patterns. It's actually the same the same formation, but just played into different direction and with different pieces. For example, I've seen be playing this, so sort of a reversed pocket, or can be played also in a buffer opening, so this sort of pocket where the queen is a bit further from the center. And so the important thing is to try to memorize, not memorize certain move order necessarily, but to understand what are the good and bad things of each of this formation. Another one interesting, which involves more than 5 pieces, is instead the comb. This is called a comb, where the space inside this flower can be used by any piece to be placed, and then they cannot be pinned. There's also a different one called a rack. I think it's called a rack, yeah, where we basically have a double pocket. We have a pocket in this direction, so the mosquito is in this pocket, but we also have another pocket here, and so it's quite flexible. It can evolve into different shapes, different positions. Of course, these are more compact shapes, but there are other ones that are more stretched. For example, the typical AntiSpawn can usually evolve into this sort of shape, or this shape. Mainly the ant is used here to anchor the pill bag so that it cannot be warped away by a pill bug. Sorry, by a mosquito acting like a pill bug. But there are similar pockets in this sort of situation as well. This is something played very commonly. If you're able to play this pattern here, then you have basically 2 pockets, the price of 1. Here you see the beetle and mosquito cannot be pinned, and they are protected by black pieces. Or there are a situation where you have instead a sort of pseudo pocket, at least that's how I call it, where in this case you see the mosquito cannot be pinned by any black piece, but it's not actually a pocket, it's only a cluster. But pinning the queen here at this position means that this place is not available for black, or actually it is, but it will create a ring that probably will end up in a unfavorable position to black. So it's a trigger point. Of course, if white pins here because it wants to take this point away, then we have a completely different game, as now it's black who creates the X trap and the trigger point again, and there's no pseudo pocket anymore. So I mean, there are a lot of decisions, and each of these takes to a different shape and then different plans, of course, after the opening. Concept, the last one I want to talk about today, is the ant game and the beetle game. This is something that it's probably common to the whole game, not just the opening. But I think it's interesting to start to think about that from the opening, because some openings favor ant game and some other openings favor a beetle game, and there's always a sort of imbalance between the two, and if you pick one, you're probably gonna lose on the other one. First, what they mean. So ant game, we refer to placing your ants as soon as possible and use them to pin your opponent pieces, while your opponent is doing that at the same time. So trying to keep as many ants free as possible, and your opponent tries to do the same. The beetle game is a sort of similar thing, but used for like referring to beetles, which is not as crucial. Normally, you don't want to put your beetles immediately in play, exactly because you would not have your ants in play, that are usually more flexible and more useful both in attack and defense. But most of the Hive is usually a balance between two different aspects, and in this case, what I like to see as a battle between ants and beetle in a way. So I'll show you a game between Judoka and Stepanzo where this is particularly evident. It's not always that evident, but here white goes for Judoka, goes for a very aggressive opening, similar one I showed before. And the way for black to react is to place as many ants as possible in play. That's actually the typical way to react to anything. But here white has willingly basically accepted that black has got the ant game, and the prize is this is the prize, and what he gets in return is a beetle game. So he already has a beetle on top of the hive, ready to cover the black ladybug. This white mosquito will be able to move as a beetle now, and black will try to react by placing as many ants as possible and trying to pin the opponent pieces from the outside. This is often called also playing the outside hive versus playing the inner hive, the outer hive versus the inner hive. And usually the inner hive is dominated by the beetles, while the outer hive is controlled by the ants. This game ended up with a win for Judoka, but it was really complicated. The point is that even if the beetle seems very scary, if you are able to control enough spawn points on the outside of the hive, then your opponent will not be able to bring new pieces in play. So for how strong a beetle can be, they cannot win by themselves. They need still new pieces to come in. And so there is this imbalance between the two. For example, here white has created a pocket. So again, it's playing in the inner hive, while black will try to take spawn points here on the outer hive and potentially counterattack quickly. You see, white has not played a single ant, which seems to be very counterintuitive, like at least doesn't follow the golden rules of hive openings, at least what I've said in the previous video. Keep in mind that if you give up something, you usually gain on something else. And this imbalance between ants and beetle is very typical. One that I showed you before was probably a particular case, because most of the time players focus on the ant game first, and then the beetle game comes at a later stage. I'll show you now a game of the same match between Stepanzo and Judoka. This time Stepanzo plays white and Judoka plays black. They're playing a Z opening, white is playing an AntiSpawn setup, black plays a quick ant, and then black goes for this bent or meta pillbug setup with the idea of creating a pocket. Always keeps in mind that. But as you can see, this is always a more, like, it is a more standard game where both player plays their ants in order to block the opponent ants, pin the opponent ants, and then once the structure of the hive is decided, then you think about the Beetle game. I was mentioning the pocket before, but Black decided to go for a more stretched kind of pattern. The important thing is that the mosquito is placed both next to the ant, so we have two ants, but also next to the pillbug, such that if the mosquito is pinned, the piece that pins the mosquito will be able to, like, it will have to be anchored here if it doesn't want to be moved away by the mosquito. It's a very common theme. So the game goes on in this way. The two players try to pin each other ants, and only at some point the Beetle comes in. So the important thing is to keep this in mind, just to know that the ant game first will most of the time decide your plan for later and the way you have to react to your opponent plan. But in some cases, as in the previous game, you can give up one of the two, the ant game, to go into a Beetle game, or focus on the ant game and see what happens, like how your opponent reacts. So this was everything. I hope it was useful. I'll like to do more videos about openings, maybe on some specific openings. There's a lot to talk about, as you've seen already, lots of common themes, but there are a lot of subtleties and little things that only when you study and you play for a long time you know. So in general, I always recommend to watch games from the World Cup, or in general from people with more experience than you, and see what are their favorite formations, patterns, how they play the ant game, what kind of move order they use, what queen configuration they prefer. So basically everything explained in the video. Hope you liked it, and subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.